The sun was a pale coin that day, low and mean over the desert ridge, the kind that turned everything gold before it burned to gray. Red Hollow lay half asleep under the weight of noon, its streets scattered with dust and horse tracks, its saloon doors sighing with every swing. Inside, smoke hung thick as secrets. Men spoke in mutters, cards slapped against the table, and the smell of whiskey tangled with sweat and regret. At the center of it all stood Clara May, a woman whose quiet was louder than the room. 23, but her eyes carried winters beyond that. Her hair, once the color of river wheat, had dulled from the sun, and her hands, though gentle, trembled just enough to betray the years of work and want behind them. Beside her, the rancher Cole Barrett counted silver on the table. 12 pieces, old and dull, but clean. Each one hit the wood like a nail in a coffin. A man in a brown vest, the kind who dealt in human troubles and called it business, leaned back in his chair. His voice was slick as oil. "She'll keep your home, Cole. Cook, clean, do as you say. No trouble in her." Cole grunted, his jaw set like stone. He didn't look at Clara when he said, "Good. I ain't looking for talk, just obedience." And that was that. No papers. No witness. Just a deal struck in the dying light of decency. The sheriff, who'd been sitting by the door, turned his face toward the window, a coward's way of claiming ignorance. The piano stopped. Every man in the saloon stared at the woman being traded for silver and silence, and then went back to their drinks. The door creaked when she left. No one followed. Cole's ranch lay 5 miles south of town, past the dry riverbed and the dying cottonwoods. A stretch of land wide enough to make a man feel like God and lonely enough to make him forget mercy. He'd built it himself, plank by plank, on sweat and pride. But pride is a poor thing to live with. It leaves little room for kindness. Clara arrived there just before dusk. The house was sturdy, square, the windows small and mean. Chickens scratched near the fence, and a single horse swayed in the corral, tail flicking at flies. Cole showed her the kitchen, the pump, the washboard, and the bed she'd use in the small room off the hall. He didn't say much, just nodded and walked out to the barn. And she stood there, fingers resting on the windowsill, staring out at the horizon like it was the edge of another world. When night came, she lit a single candle. The flame trembled in the draft, just like her heart. In the distance, coyotes called, long, lonely howls that seemed to echo her name. She sat on the narrow bed, removed her shoes, and held her locket, a small silver oval worn smooth by years of handling. Inside, a faded picture of her mother smiled through time's blur. Her mother's words returned like a ghost's whisper. "Don't let them tell you what you're worth, child. Silver tarnishes. Souls don't. But words don't always hold against hunger or fear or the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones." The days came slow. Each morning, the light broke through her window and stretched across the floorboards like spilled honey. Clara worked from before dawn, washing, sweeping, mending. Cole spoke little. He was not cruel in the way of fists, but his silence was sharp, and his eyes weighed her like she was something owned. Sometimes, when he came in from the fields, he'd stand by the doorway and watch her, not with affection, but with the kind of possession that made her skin tighten. She would nod politely, say supper's ready, and wait for the moment to pass the tea night. She'd sit outside when he'd gone to sleep, under the wide bowl of stars. There, she let herself breathe. She'd hum a tune she barely remembered, soft and sad, a lullaby from a time when her name still meant freedom. But the wind never answered. The first sign of change came on a Thursday, a whisper through the town that reached even her ears. The drifter had come riding in from the east. They said he had no past, no name worth remembering, and no reason to stay. He was a man who carried dust and silence with him, and the kind of sadness that makes others step aside. Clara didn't know yet that the sound of his boots on the saloon floor would one day change the rhythm of her heart. She only heard his name spoken over the fence line that evening, by the neighbor boy who came to deliver grain. "Jonas Reed," he said, adjusting his hat. "Quiet fella. Help in with the horses in town. Folks say he's got decent hands." And then the boy was gone, kicking up a trail of dust. That night, she dreamed of a voice she hadn't yet heard. Steady, low, like thunder too far to frighten, but close enough to promise rain. The next morning, Cole left for Red Hollow. He needed supplies, he said. She watched him ride away, the silver coins glinting in the saddlebag like the mark of her captivity. By noon, she was in the garden, her hands deep in the dry soil, when she heard hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. She rose, brushing her palms against her dress. That a man on horseback approached the gate, broad-shouldered, dust-covered, his hat pulled low. He didn't ride like a stranger. He rode like someone who'd forgotten how to belong. He stopped a few yards from her, dismounted, and spoke quietly. "Ma'am, sorry to intrude. Just passing through. Horse threw a shoe down by the ridge. Thought I'd ask for a hammer and some nails, if you got him." His eyes met hers for just a moment, and something wordless passed. Not recognition, not yet, but understanding. She nodded toward the barn. "You'll find what you need there." He touched his hat in thanks, his gaze lingering for the briefest heartbeat before he turned away. And for the first time since she'd been bought, Clara felt something shift inside her. Something that had nothing to do with fear. It was as if the wind had changed. That night, when Cole returned, the air in the house felt different. He noticed it, too, the faint trace of warmth, like sunlight left behind by another's passing. That he asked if anyone had come by. Clara hesitated, then said simply, "A drifter. Just needed a hammer." Cole grunted, said nothing more, but she couldn't stop thinking about the sound of that man's voice. The gentleness buried under dust and distance. In a world where everything was bought and sold, it had sounded like something that couldn't be. The West was vast, merciless, and filled with men who thought silver could buy peace. But somewhere between that traded silver and the slow rise of hope, the desert was preparing a different story. That a story of a woman learning her worth again. That a drifter learning that love wasn't found, it was earned. And a rancher about to face the truth no man of coin ever wants to hear. The sun set that night like a wound closing slow, and Red Hollow slept, unaware that the next dawn would carry the first scent of redemption on its wind. The drifter stayed longer than he planned. His name, Jonas Reed, carried little weight, even less history. He came with no kin, no home, and no hurry. Folks in Red Hollow learned quick not to ask where a man like him came from. A man who looked at the horizon more than he spoke of it. He'd meant to ride on once his horse was shod and the dust cooled. But there was something about that ranch, or perhaps someone, that made the leaving harder than it should have been. When Cole Barrett offered him days' work fixing fences, Jonas accepted. He told himself it was just until the horse healed. But every morning that passed, his heart grew a little quieter. The land had that effect, broad and endless, humbling a man until he forgot what he was running from. Clara watched him from the window the first few days. He worked steady, slow, precise, the way a man moves when he's learned not to waste effort. His hands were rough, his shirt faded, but his manner carried something rare out here, a gentleness that didn't beg to be seen. When he came by the porch for water, he always left space between them, respectful, careful, like he'd been taught that kindness was a fragile thing and best handled with distance. Cole noticed none of it at first. He was gone most days, trading cattle or nursing whiskey in the saloon. But the quiet between Clara and Jonas grew roots, not spoken, but deeply felt. One afternoon, as the sun turned red over the canyon, Clara brought him a tin cup of water. Her hands trembled slightly, though not from fear. Their fingers brushed when she passed it, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The wind, the horses, even the cicadas got a simple touch, but one that lived longer than words. That evening, she found herself humming again while setting supper, a tune her mother once sang when the house still knew laughter. Cole came in, noticed the softness in her face, and frowned. "What's got you smiling?" he muttered. She shook her head. "Just the weather, I suppose." He didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Men like Cole thought love was obedience, and obedience left no room for mystery. Later that night, Jonas lingered near the barn, watching fireflies drift above the dry grass. Clara stepped out quietly with a lantern, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "You fixed the north fence?" she asked softly. "Yes, ma'am. Should hold through the season." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to call me ma'am." Jonas hesitated, eyes low. "Old habit. Comes from respect." "Respect's a rare thing in these parts," she said. That he nodded. "That's why it ought to stay." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was gentle. The kind of silence that holds two hearts without touching them. The days lengthened. Jonas mended fences, repaired the roof, and taught the younger ranch hand how to shoe a horse without breaking its spirit. Clara began leaving him lunch on the fence post, bread wrapped in cloth, a few apples, once even a slice of pie she pretended was for the hired hands. He never said thank you aloud, but she'd see the napkin folded neat on the porch rail each evening, and that was enough. Cole started to notice. He came home earlier, watched them through narrowed eyes. Jealousy is a dry thing. It burns slow, then fast. He barked orders sharper than before, slammed doors harder, rode horses rougher. But Clara had learned the quiet strength of stillness. She no longer flinched. And Jonas, he stayed silent. But there was steel under his calm point one night. After a long day fixing the corral, Jonas sat outside, sharpening his knife. Clara joined him, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. "You plan on leaving soon?" she asked. He thought a moment before answering. "I used to think there wasn't a place meant for me. But some towns got a way of asking you to stay, without saying a word." Clara looked down into her cup. "This town doesn't ask. It just takes." "Maybe," he said, "but you can still give something different back." When she looked up, there was warmth in his eyes. Not pity, not want, but recognition. Like he saw the part of her that had been buried under years of silence. That it frightened her a little. And yet, it felt like breathing after too long underwater. Cole came home drunk that night. The door hit the wall with a crack. "Jonas," he bellowed. "You done with the horses?" Jonas stood, calm as still water. "Yes, sir." Fed and settled. Cole staggered closer, his breath thick with whiskey. "You think I don't see how you look at her? You think I don't notice?" Clara froze by the hearth, hands trembling. Jonas didn't move. "Ain't my business what you think, Cole. Just doing my work." "Your work?" Cole spat. "Don't include my wife's eyes." Jonas said nothing. There was no threat in him. And somehow, that made Cole angrier. He slammed a fist into the wall, splintering the wood, then stumbled toward the bedroom, muttering curses that clung to the air like smoke. When the door closed, Clara exhaled, slow, shaky. Jonas met her gaze for a heartbeat too long, then nodded once and stepped outside into the dark. The night air was cool, the stars sharp above him. He looked toward the canyon where the wind carried the faintest scent of rain. Something was changing, not in the land, but in him. That he'd come to Red Hollow to pass through. But every day he stayed, the world grew less lonely. Every glance, every quiet kindness tied him to that place and to her. Sometimes, a man doesn't need a reason to stay, just someone worth staying for. The next morning, the air smelled of coming storm. Clara watched him ride out toward the southern fence, the sky bruised and heavy behind him. Her hands found the locket at her throat, fingers brushing the silver surface. For the first time since she'd come to that ranch, she whispered a prayer. Not for escape, not for freedom, but for the courage to believe that kindness, even in the Wild West, could be something a heart might live on. And somewhere out by the canyon, Jonas Reed felt that prayer like a soft wind at his back. He smiled, just a little, and kept riding. Because sometimes, the hardest thing a drifter can do is stay. Autumn crept into Red Hollow like a secret. The air grew cooler, the wind more thoughtful. The land, usually dry and harsh, seemed to rest. And in that stillness, something began to bloom. Not fast, not loud, but steady as the heartbeat of the earth itself. Jonas stayed. He fixed the barn roof after the last storm, built new water troughs, and trained the young colts to trust a calm voice instead of the whip. Cole paid him, though tight-lipped now, his words clipped with jealousy he barely hid. But Jonas wasn't there for the money. Every morning, as he walked to the corral, he'd catch sight of Clara in the doorway, apron tied, hair loose from the wind, eyes softer now. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Sometimes love doesn't ask for permission. It just sits quietly between two people until the silence feels like home. Clara found herself humming again. She baked bread that rose just right. She planted wildflowers along the fence, though she knew they'd never last the winter. When Jonas passed by, she'd leave him small things, a slice of pie, a mended glove, a word of thanks whispered so softly it barely reached his ears. That he'd nod, that quiet half-smile flickering like a shy flame, and she'd feel warmth rise in her chest. Cole saw it all. Every gesture, every look. He felt his claim slipping, not just over her hands, but over her heart. His pride, once his armor, had begun to crack. He drank heavier now. Nights grew louder in the house, though no one spoke of it. Clara's eyes dimmed whenever his boots hit the porch. Jonas could feel it, the unease in the air, the sound of tension like a rope stretched too tight. But still, he stayed. Because kindness isn't cowardice. It's the courage to remain gentle when the world tries to make you hard. One evening, the sun dropped low and wide across the fields, staining everything in copper. Clara was sitting by the porch, sewing. When Jonas came to fix the gate latched, he worked in silence until she spoke. "Jonas," she said softly, "why do you stay here?" He paused, turning the metal in his hands. "Guess I found work that matters." She tilted her head. "You could find work anywhere." He looked at her then, really looked. The fading light caught the edges of her face, the weariness, the quiet strength. "Not this kind," he said. "Not with this kind of peace." She smiled faintly, the needle trembling in her fingers. "Peace?" Jonas nodded. "Not the loud kind. The kind that don't ask for much. Just good hearts in the same place for a while." She didn't answer. Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. Because no one had ever spoken to her like she was part of peace before. That a few days later, a storm swept through the valley. Wind howled against the shutters. The cattle panicked. Jonas was out in it, coat pulled tight, driving the herd to higher ground. From the window, Clara watched the rain soak the fields. Lightning flashed, brief and merciless. And through it, she saw him, steady, unafraid, calling to the animals with a calm that defied the chaos around him. By the time he returned, the storm had passed, but his shoulders were drenched, his hands raw from rope burn. She ran to him, took his coat, scolded him through tears she didn't realize were falling. "You'll catch your death out there," she whispered. He smiled, tired but soft. "Better me than the herd." Without thinking, she reached up, touched his face, just to make sure he was real, warm, alive. And when she did, something broke inside both of them. The wall built by fear, duty, and pride crumbled in the simplest of gestures. They stood there in the silence after the storm, the air smelling of rain, and something new that he didn't speak. Neither did she. But their hearts did, in the way his hand covered hers, slow and sure. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window again, the moonlight silvering her hands. The world outside was clean, washed. Somewhere in the barn, Jonas slept. Or maybe he didn't. She opened her locket, the small silver oval he'd fixed weeks before. Her mother's faded smile stared back at her. For years, that little picture had been her anchor. But tonight, it felt like a reminder of something else. That love, real love, wasn't about being owned or saved. It was about being seen, and Jonas had seen her. Not the work, not the past, not the fear. Just her. The next morning, Cole's anger broke like a dam that he stumbled out of the house before dawn, silver coins rattling in his pocket. Those same 12 pieces he'd once used to claim her. His voice was thick with whiskey when he found Jonas by the barn. "She was bought with this," he spat, tossing the coins into the dirt. "Bought and paid. Don't forget that." Jonas stared at the ground for a long moment. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling soft gold over the field. Then he looked up, calm, clear, unshaken. "Then let me earn her," he said quietly. "Not with silver. With love." The world seemed to still. Even the wind stopped to listen. Cole's face twisted, red with rage. He swung once, a fist heavy with years of pride. Jonas didn't move. The second blow cut his lip, drew blood. Still, he didn't lift a hand. When Clara ran from the house, her voice cracked through the air. "Stop. Please stop." Cole froze, chest heaving. The sight of her, tears streaking her face, eyes wide with terror, drained what little manhood his anger had left. He turned, stumbled toward his horse, and rode off toward town. The sound of hooves faded until only the wind remained. Jonas stood bleeding in the pale light, his breath steady. Clara reached for him, her hands shaking as she wiped the blood from his chin. "You shouldn't have," he stopped her softly. "It ain't weakness to stand still. Sometimes that's the only way to show what matters." Her heart trembled at his calm. And there, between blood and dawn, something sacred took root. A promise that no silver could measure, no man could own. They stood together in the quiet field, the coins glinting forgotten in the dirt, while the sun climbed slow over red hollowed. It was not victory that filled the air that morning. It was grace. By the time autumn leaned into winter, the air around Red Hollow had gone still, too still. The sky hung low, swollen with the kind of silence that made even the crows stop crying. Cole Barrett had vanished into that silence. After the morning he rode away, no one saw him for weeks. Word drifted back through the saloon that he'd been drinking hard in the next town over, a man unraveling faster than the bottle could forgive him. Clara and Jonas didn't speak of him. Some names only reopen wounds when spoken. The ranch breathed easier. The horses were calmer, the nights quieter. Jonas fixed the roof, rebuilt the corral, and mended the window where the glass had cracked from one of Cole's fits. And Clara, she began to laugh again. Not the loud laughter of youth, but the soft kind that rises when sorrow finally loosens its grip. Each evening they'd sit by the porch, watching the sunset pour gold into the valley. Sometimes their hands brushed, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. What bound them didn't need to be declared. Then, one evening, the storm came. It started as a murmur over the hills, thunder rolling like a faraway drum. Jonas smelled it before he saw it. The sharp scent of lightning in the air. Midnight. The sky tore open. Wind howled through the canyons, whipping dust into the night. Rain came in slashes, hard and sudden, and with it, fire. A lightning strike out by the dry ridge. Jonas was first to see the glow, faint at first, then fierce and alive. Flames licking the horizon, running through the grass toward the ranch. "Clara," he shouted, bursting into the house. "Get the horses." She didn't ask questions. Together, they moved like one body, grabbing blankets, buckets, anything that could fight the blaze. The fire roared down the slope, feeding on wind and dry brush. Sparks flew like angry stars. The night turned orange and alive with danger. Jonas ran toward the barn, Clara close behind. The horses screamed inside, trapped in panic. He cut the rope and led them out, his face black with soot, his lungs raw from smoke. "Go," he shouted, driving them toward the stream. When he turned back, the roof of the barn had caught. Fire danced along the beams, hot and merciless. "Jonas!" Clara screamed. "Leave it." But he was already inside. He knew what he was after. The small silver locket that hung from the nail by the window. She'd left it there while they worked that morning, saying she didn't want to lose it in the dust. Through the heat and smoke, he found it, cool metal glinting in the red light. He grabbed it, stumbled toward the door as the roof cracked above him. Outside, Clara was running toward him, tears cutting streaks down her ash-stained cheeks. When he emerged, coughing, the fire haloed around him like a crown of judgment. He handed her the locket, fingers trembling. "You keep it," he whispered, voice hoarse. "It's yours. Always was." She pressed it to her chest, sobbing. Together, they stood watching the barn collapse. The place that had once held their pain, now burning it clean. The fire burned till dawn. They fought till they had nothing left, water and were both gone. And when the last flame died, the ranch was nothing but ash and memory. The morning light was strange, pale, hollow, and yet somehow pure. Smoke curled lazily toward the sky. Jonas and Clara sat side by side on the charred ground, the locket resting in her palm. "What now?" she whispered. Jonas looked out over the ruins, his voice soft. "Now we build something new. Maybe smaller, maybe quieter, but ours." She turned to him. "Ours," she repeated, and the word felt like freedom. They built again. Not the same house, not on the same soil. Down by the creek, they raised a cabin from what the fire had spared. It was humble, with one window that caught the morning sun and a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. That he worked the land slow and honest. She kept a garden that bloomed with wildflowers come spring. Sometimes they rode into town together, and people would whisper, not with scandal anymore, but with wonder, "Is that her?" they'd murmur. "The woman who was bought with silver?" And someone always answered, "Not anymore. She's the one love earned." Years passed. The fire that once nearly took their lives became part of their story, a line carved into memory, but not sorrow. Jonas grew gray around the temples. Clara's hands grew steady and sure. They never had riches, but they had peace, the rarest kind out west. When travelers passed through the valley, they'd sometimes stop by the creek and find a small wooden cross near the water's edge. Time had worn the carving faint, but the words could still be read if you looked close enough. And they say, on certain evenings when the wind drifts low through Red Hollow, You can hear two voices carried through the sagebrush, one deep and steady, the other soft and laughing. The kind of sound that makes even the loneliest soul believe that the desert can bloom again, because love, once earned, never truly dies. It just changes shape, from flesh to wind, from memory to echoed. If this story found its way to your heart tonight, if you felt the dust, the fire, and the quiet strength of love that's chosen, not bought, let it stay with you a while. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe kindness is still the strongest thing left in this wild world. And tell me, from where are you watching tonight? Under what sky does this story reach you? Somewhere out there, another heart waits to be seen, not owned, not bought, just loved.